Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another wellbeing webinar sponsored by Drake Workwise and Drake Wellness Hub. I am Kevin Bowles, Head of Clinical Services and Principal Psychologist at Drake Workwise. I oversee the EAP services and wellbeing initiatives for our valued clients. Before I start the webinar, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and pay my respect to the elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. Also, just some housekeeping. Please make sure you're on mute throughout. If you have any questions, then please add them to the chat function throughout the webinar so I can respond to them at the end. The purpose of today's webinar is to lower stigma within the workplace and increase everyone's comfort with talking about managing mental health in the workplace. 3 questions I want you to reflect on throughout the webinar are: what negative view or attitude do you have about mental health? What are the barriers to mental health care in your workplace? And finally, what can you do straight away to lower mental health stigma in the workplace? To start it off, I'd like to show you a quick 1-minute video from the Black Dog Institute on how mentally healthy is your workplace.
Given the statistics, it's almost inevitable that you'll come across mental illness in your work or social life. 45% of Australian adults experience mental illness at some point in their lifetime. And right now, 1 in 6 of the working population are suffering from a diagnosable mental illness, with the most common being depression, anxiety, and substance use disorders. But amazingly, 50% of managers believe no one in their place of work is affected by mental illness. And we know that as common as mental ill health is, less than 40% of people affected will seek professional help. Ignorance about the prevalence of mental illness helps to fuel the stigma associated with these conditions. Recognizing the facts about how common mental illness is and what support is available can help people feel less alone, encourage them to seek help, and create an understanding and supportive environment where stigma is reduced.
So the scope of this webinar is to start off with a definition and the facts about stigma, the types of stigma, including personal, perceived, self-stigma, and structural. Then we're going to cover off on why organizations need to focus on stigma. And within that, we're going to talk about workplace productivity, employee health outcomes. And then finally, we're going to cover off on tips and steps towards eliminating stigma. And this includes what managers can do and what workers can do. So reducing the discrimination and stigma associated with mental illness and mental health concerns is an important component of improving the quality of life and well-being of people experiencing mental health problems. This relates to how a person with lived experience is perceived by employers, work colleagues, and the wider community. Mental health stigma. Yes, can you get a copy of the slides? We'll be able to help out with that at the end. So thank you for asking that question. I'll respond to all your questions at the end too. So mental health stigma is the negative view of attitude towards people struggling with their mental health, including those living with mental health condition such as anxiety or depression. So stigma in the workplace can lead to discrimination, including harassment, affect people's attitudes and beliefs towards those struggling with their mental health, including themselves. It can prevent those struggling with their mental health from feeling safe to disclose and seek support from their employer and others around them. An open and inclusive workplace where workers feel safe and supported to seek help early is better for everyone. So the types of stigma, as I mentioned before, there's four that we're going to cover off on. The first one is personal stigma, and that is a person's stigmatizing attitudes and beliefs about other people. Now, this can lead to harassment of a colleague in relation to their mental health, the decision not to employ or promote somebody in relation to their mental health, unfair assumptions being made about the capability of someone in relation to their mental health. The next one is perceived stigma. Now, that is a person's belief about the negative and stigmatizing views that other people hold. Now, this may prevent somebody from seeking a promotion as they believe their colleagues judge them in relation to their mental health. It may stop someone from seeking support from their colleagues as they assume they will be treated badly, or there will be a negative consequence if they disclose that they are struggling with their mental health or have a mental health condition. The third one is self-stigma. Now, this is the stigmatizing views that individuals hold about themselves. Now, this can prevent someone who is struggling with their mental health from seeking help as they believe they should be stronger or more resilient and able to cover or recover on their own. It may also prevent someone from seeking employment or promotion as they feel they are unworthy due to struggling with their mental health. The fourth and final one that we're covering here is the structural stigma. And this is where the policies and structural norms of workplaces restrict the opportunities, resources, and well-being of those struggling with their mental health or living with a mental health condition. Now, this may lead employers to limit the help or support provided to their workers in relation to a worker's well-being and mental health. It may make it difficult for somebody who is struggling with their mental health to seek formal support when policies are in place that require all workers to meet certain health requirements. So that's the four stigmas within this webinar. So why organizations need to focus on stigma? Well, mental health stigma is a key challenge for many workplaces. Mentally healthy workplaces deliver improved productivity and workforce participation. Workplaces that foster and support psychological health and well-being of workers address stigma early and encourage help-seeking behaviour. These workplaces are likely to experience less absenteeism, employee turnover, and psychological claims. Now, evidence tells us that just over half, or 54% of people with a mental health condition are not seeking treatment. The longer a person delays treatment, the more likely they are to take leave, resulting in significant impacts not only for the worker, but for the team and the workplace. Stigma may prevent a person experiencing a mental health issue from seeking help in a timely manner. This can lead to poorer health outcomes. Stigma may lead workers to hide or ignore risks to their mental health or fear of negative repercussions in the workplace, such as such as being treated differently or losing their job. This, in turn, can hinder employers' ability to identify and quickly respond to the risks, which may lead to more severe health outcomes for workers. Now, research has found that when people have higher levels of well-being, they are six times more likely to feel engaged, 29% more likely to be more productive, 45% more likely to be satisfied in their jobs, 32% less likely to quit, 46% less likely to experience unhealthy days, and finally, 125% less likely to burn out. So it makes sense to reduce stigma and to reduce the barriers to care can really have a significant impact on the well-being of an individual and the functioning and performance of a team and workplace. Now, what are some of the things that we can think about to reduce stigma? And what we can do is focus on the manager level and then at the work level. And to start off with, what can managers do? Well, first of all, build your mental health literacy. So education is considered an effective strategy to build a manager's comfort to talk about mental health, initiate conversations about mental health, and increase confidence in helping a worker through mental health concerns and guiding them to helpful resources. Secondly, develop workplace mental health and wellbeing policies. So commit to a mental health policy that aims to reduce stigma and promote good health in the workplace. When workers see that their managers and senior leaders are committed to creating a safe and inclusive culture, they may feel more comfortable to discuss and better manage their own mental health. A policy should be easily understood and applied, relevant to all workers, and enduring beyond the short term. Next, build mental health awareness. So develop the mental health awareness of workers by making information, tools, and support accessible. Better understanding around mental health can build trust between colleagues and lower barriers to seeking help. Next, encourage open conversations. So encourage open conversations about mental health and support services provided by the organisation on a regular basis, particularly during difficult times and when workers may be struggling. Now, talk openly about the services available and encourage people to use them when they are needed. That's the key, to really highlight what they need or what could benefit them in times of struggle. Next one, offer flexible work arrangements. So offer appropriate workplace adjustments to workers experiencing mental health concerns. Often, quick and easy adjustments can be made that will help workers manage their mental health and improve their well-being and productivity. Next, establish a psychologically safe working environment. So provide workers with a healthy and safe workplace by monitoring and addressing psychosocial hazards. Having these issues addressed promptly shows workers that their employer prioritizes their health and safety, and that's very important. A worker really needs to feel safe in their workplace, and work is quite a significant thing in someone's life. And if they don't feel safe, then that can really impact on a lot of aspects of their life, their health and well-being. Speaking of workers, what can workers do? Now, eliminating stigma is a shared responsibility amongst employees within a workplace, from senior leaders to individual workers. So what can workers do? Well, first of all, learn more about mental health. Education is considered an effective strategy to build an individual's comfort to talk about mental health, engage in conversations about mental health, and increase confidence in helping peers through their mental health concerns. As a worker, as a member of a small team, it's important to foster psychological safety in the team. So take an active role in making the team environment a safe place to openly talk about mental health. Speak about the team as a key support for someone to address their workplace stress, mental health, and wellbeing concerns. This includes guiding a colleague to self-help and professional resources. So we know that there's varying levels of comfort for people with a mental health concern to seeking support from informal support resources like friends and family, or some self-help strategies and guides found online. And then that is a different level of comfort compared to seeking professional help, which can be quite daunting, especially opening up to someone that is unfamiliar. It might be the first time that someone's opening up. So as a peer, as a colleague, as a teammate, it's important to encourage people to go to something that they feel most comfortable with, but also at the right level. It could be for a low level mental health concern, and a self-help or seeking support from a friend or family member might be most appropriate. However, if it's more severe, if it's crisis, for instance, perhaps more formal support is required. So as a peer, as a colleague, as a teammate, it's important to really encourage someone to tap into those resources. Now, if your organization has some formal resources like an EAP, then that is another avenue of seeking support. And we do know that such support resources like EAP services are confidential and are safe places for people to access support, and free to those within organizations that have established an EAP service within their workplace. So it's important to understand that you, as a colleague, are a key support to some of your teammates that might be experiencing a mental health concern. And as we've found in this pandemic, it can be quite challenging, and there are a lot of uncertainties that really increase anxiety and stress, and also the return back into the workplace can really affect someone's sense of certainty and their anxiety, because they're going back out into an environment that the pandemic has really shaken up, and it can be quite a challenge for many people. So another point that workers can focus on to reduce stigma within the workplace includes speak openly about mental health in the workplace. And it takes courage to speak openly about mental health. You can play a role model for a colleague who is anxious about talking about their stress and mental health concerns. You can start a conversation by asking, "Are you okay?" when a colleague appears stressed. Then listening non-judgmentally to their concerns and offering support and resources, both informal and formal support resources. Next, share the responsibility to reduce stigma and contribute to creative mental health initiatives in the workplace. So be aware of the organizational policies, tools, and support resources aimed to make a healthy workplace. Take an active role in team discussions and initiatives that help reduce barriers to care and enhance mental health awareness. Importantly, educate your peers, colleagues, teammates who appear to be negative towards mental health. So efforts to dismantle stigma are critical because negative stereotypes about mental health care prevent people from seeking help. Professional athletes, including Alexei Pappas and Michael Phelps, are fighting stigma whilst speaking about the pressures of competition and the need to prioritize mental health. Quote, "It is not weak or shameful to talk about mental health," said Olympic runner Alexei Pappas, who has spoken openly about her depression. If we, and this is quoting, "If we think about taking care of our minds the same way athletes think about taking care of their bodies, the shame goes away, she said. It becomes a question of health and peak performance. So the same principle can be applied to our health. We can dedicate as much time to our mental health as we do to our physical health. So if you go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week, then replace 1 to 2 of those workouts with an activity for your mind. For example, a meditation session, a gentle and mindful walk without your phone, or a relaxing yin yoga session. Now, I must speak from experience as a clinically trained psychologist and someone who has provided lots of education on mindfulness and cognitive behavioral therapy to individual clients and groups too. I practice what I preach, and I really enjoy talking to people in group settings about how to really enhance not only mental health and well-being, but reduce stigma, because stigma can be such a barrier. And I worked in the Department of Defense as a senior Army psychologist, and there was a lot of stigma there, a very masculine orientated environment. And we worked hard to reduce the stigma. Now, to aim to fully eliminate stigma is quite an ambitious goal. And if we really start at the ground level and educate everyone, all the workers, right up to the senior executive level, then that's one strategy to reduce stigma. That is education. Mental health literacy is very important, and mental health awareness is a key strategy to reduce stigma. Now, and this is not just in the organizations, but this can really feed out into the community too. There is a stigma towards mental health in the community, and we can work all together to reduce that. So as we come to the end of this webinar, I want you to reflect on those 3 questions I asked you at the beginning. First one was, what negative view or attitude do you have about mental health? Next one was, what are the barriers to mental health care in your workplace? And the third one, what can you do straight away to lower mental health stigma in the workplace? Now, we've covered off a lot in this webinar, and we've highlighted that stigma can be at 4 different levels. And there are some strategies, some steps and tips that both the managers and workers can take to reduce stigma within the workplace. So reflect back on the content and those 3 questions I just raised, and consider, what can you take away from today? What are 2 things you've learnt? And the final question is, do you have any questions? And I'll just go to the last slide here. And so one question that I see in the chat box is, what course or training do you recommend to increase manager mental health literacy? As I mentioned before, mental health literacy is very important, and awareness training on mental health is one key strategy to reduce stigma. And there are some really good mental health first aid courses out there that managers or anyone can jump onto. Now, these can range from a couple hours to 2 days worth. There is also an instructor course on mental health first aid, and that can be about 5 full days. So I do encourage an individual, whether they're a manager or worker, to do some sort of training for a course that's quite suitable for their position and also their interest too. There's no point in forcing a worker or a manager to do a course if they're not really interested. We need champions out there that can be motivated and motivate other people to lower stigma. We need those people that can really lead and really foster that safe environment for people to open up and talk about mental health. So mental health first aid courses, that's a really good start. And if you as an individual can't afford a lot of time off work, then perhaps just reading online or tapping into your EAP provider and getting some additional training, whether they are just online resources or a quick video on what to look out for in colleagues or in the workplace to really lower mental health stigma. All right, so I'll go to the next one. The question is here. We'll be able to get a copy of these slides at the end, please. Yeah, so we'll look into that. No worries. Next question is, how could we assess if we, as individuals and organization, potentially have a stigma? Okay, I'm asking this because self-awareness is the first step to changing my perspective and behavior. I completely agree that awareness is one of the first steps that should occur in changing any behavior and thought patterns. So yes, you're right. So to respond to your question about how can we assess if we as individuals or organizations potentially have stigma, well, first of all, you will see that according to the definition of stigma, is that people who hold a negative attitude or view of mental health, which you would see in how they would respond to any questions about mental health, then that is the first indication whether you would have stigma within the workplace. That is other people's negative view or attitude or response towards a topic of mental health. So that's a good start. And if you can, have a workshop or even just a quick survey around the workplace about what do people think about mental health, and have a negative response item within that survey perhaps, and it might give you an indication of whether there is stigma within the workplace. Now, stigma is everywhere, so you would probably find stigma within your workplace. I suppose that the challenge is identifying what kind of stigma it might be. And we can definitely help out there with regards to particular survey questions that could identify what kind of stigma might be in your workplace. The next question is, can you please give examples of what psychosocial hazards could be in the workplace? Oh, well, that's a good one. So what kinds of psychosocial hazards could be in the workplace? Well, that could be a very toxic and a very disabled team dynamic or team environment. And that can really add on to the psychosocial stress that someone is experiencing. So if you have a small team or even a large team that is very dysfunctional, there's lots of arguments, they're not really cooperating with each other, perhaps there's a real difficulty in communicating with each other, then that is a hazard to really enhance mental health stigma within the workplace. And it's psychological and it's social. So we know that the workplace is a social aspect of someone's life. So when we combine that psychological and social, it's the psychosocial. And a dysfunctional or a team that has lots of conflict, then that's a psychosocial hazard. And that's one example. Hopefully that helps answer that question. And what type of things do you suggest for creative initiatives for the workplace? Well, that's a whole can of worms. There are so many things that I can suggest as a creative initiative within the workplace, and it's all dependent on the real uniqueness of the environments. And what I can suggest is teams coming together and having a chat about what would suit them best to reduce stigma or enhance their comfort in talking about their mental health and what could really foster their well-being within the workplace. And so one example is I used to work in special forces, and I approached this senior soldier, and we discovered, well, a lot of these soldiers are really, really busy. They're burnt out. What we really need is a day where they can reflect completely on their mental health. And so this was a really creative initiative that I guided this senior soldier to then implement. So it wasn't my idea. I just facilitated the discussion. And they ended up rolling it out throughout the regiment, and they called it the Yearly Reflection Day. A day where they reflected on their mental health and what they're doing for their mental health and what they can do to really foster a healthy mental health and well-being. So that's one example, and I do encourage everyone to sit down with their teams and think about what are some of the creative initiatives that they can do for their specific team, because it's rather difficult to really broadly suggest one that can cover off on all unique environments. I do suggest one tailored for that team in that environment. All right, so I think I've covered off on all the questions that have come through, and I would like to conclude by saying that today's webinar is an example of the great initiatives available to you through Drake Wellness Hub and Drake Workwise. Our programs are fully bespoke and are tailored to your organization's needs and budget. To discover more about how we can help, contact a member of our team. So I hope you enjoyed today, and good afternoon and goodbye.